insignificant detail let us investigate a crime. The sum of small things helps to reveal all the secrets. There is nothing more important in an investigation than details. Based on my 45 years as a detective, I'll tell you how we investigated crimes in the past. Without special equipment, cameras, and lots of databases. We relied solely on intuition, experience, and carefully gathered evidence to uncover the truth. Hi everyone. Detective Lefebre speaks. What would you do if someone you knew left behind this note? Seek where the clocks stop and the silence begins, then vanished. This is the story of Eleanor Graham, a woman who disappeared, leaving behind a trail of riddles and secrets. The disappearance of Eleanor Graham, a case of time, silence, and solitude. The mystery of Eleanor Graham was unlike any other I had encountered in my career as a private investigator. It wasn't a tale of crime or deception, but one of discovery, of a woman seeking something far beyond the ordinary, and of the journey to uncover her truth. In Brindlewood, a town nestled in a valley where fog clung to cobblestone streets and life moved at a deliberate pace, Eleanor was a paradox. She was both present and absent, a familiar face with an unfamiliar mind. Her disappearance shattered the rhythm of the community, leaving behind questions that begged for answers. What began as a missing persons case evolved into an exploration of human longing and the pursuit of meaning in a world constrained by time. Brindlewood was a town that thrived on predictability. Its residents measured time not by clocks but by routines. The opening of the bakery at dawn, the church bells at noon, and the chatter of neighbors gathered in the market square every evening. Eleanor Graham had been one of those routines, a fixed point in the town's rhythm, as dependable as the sunrise. Mrs. Cartwright, Eleanor's closest neighbor, was the first to notice her absence. The retired schoolteacher lived alone and had developed a habit of observing the comings and goings of the quiet street where she and Eleanor lived. Each morning at 7 a.m. sharp, Eleanor would appear in her garden, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and tending to her roses. But on the day Eleanor disappeared, her garden remained untouched. Mrs. Cartwright initially thought little of it. Everyone deserves a day off from routine, after all. But by the second morning, when Eleanor's curtains remained drawn, worry began to gnaw at her. On the third day, she called the local constable, who in turn alerted the town council. Brindlewood was not the kind of place where people vanished without explanation. When the authorities arrived at Eleanor's modest brick home, they found it locked from the inside. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no indication of a hasty departure. On her desk, however, lay a single note. Time may be linear, but my path isn't. Seek where the clocks stop and the silence begins. The note was handwritten, its letters precise and deliberate. To most of the townsfolk, it was a riddle without a key. To Mrs. Cartwright, who knew Eleanor's peculiarities better than anyone, it was troubling. When days turned into a week without word from Eleanor, I was called in. A private investigator with a penchant for solving the inexplicable, I was no stranger to cryptic messages or cases steeped in oddities. But even I couldn't have predicted where this case would lead. I began my investigation with the most logical first step, understanding the person at the heart of the mystery. Eleanor Graham had lived in Brindlewood for over a decade, yet no one seemed to truly know her. She was polite but reserved, attending church sporadically and declining most invitations to social gatherings. She was known for her love of books and her meticulous garden, but little else. Inside her home, I found a space that mirrored her personality. The house was neat, almost unnervingly so. Bookshelves lined the walls of her living room, their contents arranged by subject and then alphabetically. Her kitchen counters were spotless, with utensils hung in perfect symmetry. Even her closet, which I inspected for signs of packed luggage, revealed rows of clothes sorted by season and color. But it was her desk that drew my attention. It was the only area that betrayed a hint of chaos, cluttered with loose papers, pens, and stacks of journals. These journals were a revelation. They weren't diaries in the traditional sense. Eleanor didn't chronicle her feelings or recount her daily activities. Instead, they were filled with observations about the world around her. Notes on the changing angles of sunlight throughout the day, sketches of plants she encountered on her walks, and, most intriguingly, musings on time. One journal entry, written just weeks before her disappearance, stood out. The clockmaker's shop has become my sanctuary. The stillness there is unlike anything I've experienced. The clocks don't tick, yet the air hums with their presence. It is a place where time pauses, where I can hear its echoes. This was the first mention of the clockmaker's shop, an abandoned building on the edge of town. I made a note to investigate it further. Another entry, dated months earlier, hinted at Eleanor's growing fascination with time itself. Time feels less like a river and more like a labyrinth. What if the moments we live are not linear but layered? Could there be a way to step outside the current and into the stillness between? Eleanor's journals painted a portrait of a woman not merely reserved but deeply introspective, almost philosophical. They also suggested that her disappearance was deliberate, not an act of desperation, but a quest. The clockmaker's shop was a relic of Brindlewood's past. Its owner, the late Mr. Aldridge, had been a master craftsman, repairing and creating clocks that adorned the walls of homes and businesses across the region. After his death, the shop had fallen into disrepair, its once pristine facade now cloaked in ivy and grime. When I arrived, the shop seemed to exude an eerie stillness. The air was thick with the scent of wood polish and rust, a faint reminder of its former life. Peering through the dusty windows, I could make out the silhouettes of clocks, grandfather clocks, wall clocks, and pocket watches, frozen in time. With the permission of the authorities, I entered the shop. The first thing that struck me was the oppressive quiet. It wasn't the ordinary silence of an empty room. It felt deeper, almost tangible. The clocks, though plentiful, were all stopped, their hands pointing to arbitrary times. As I explored, I noticed a workbench near the back of the shop. It was cluttered with tools, gears, and what appeared to be a partially disassembled clock. Among the clutter, I found a stack of papers covered in Eleanor's handwriting. Her notes detailed her attempts to restore some of the clocks, though it was clear she was less interested in functionality and more in their chimes. One paper was particularly revealing. It contained a sketch of a clock face, its hands frozen at 3:15, with annotations describing its unique resonance. This detail immediately connected to the note she had left behind. As I searched further, I noticed a rug in the center of the room that seemed out of place. When I pulled it back, I found a trapdoor. It opened with a groan, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. At this point, Eleanor's story was unfolding like the gears of a clock, each piece fitting together, driving me closer to the truth. The journals, the shop, the cryptic note, all pointed to something far more profound than a simple disappearance. Little did I know that what lay below the trapdoor would deepen the mystery even further. Part 4. The Secret Chamber. Descending into the hidden chamber beneath the clockmaker's shop was like stepping into another world. The air was cooler, tinged with the faint metallic scent of old machinery. The chamber's walls were lined with shelves sagging under the weight of books and jars, each labeled with cryptic phrases such as dawn resonance and twilight echo. On a central work table, instruments lay scattered, tuning forks, magnifying glasses, and peculiar devices that seemed like hybrids of clock parts and audio equipment. Eleanor's journals, scattered across the table, were a trove of insight. One entry, meticulously detailed, read, "Sound is not merely vibration. It is a carrier of time itself. The chime at 3:15 possesses a resonance that I cannot explain. It lingers, as though time itself pauses to listen. This is the silence I seek, the stillness between seconds." I spent hours piecing together her theories. She believed certain sound frequencies, particularly those created by the chimes of antique clocks, could influence perception of time. Her writing suggested she was attempting to isolate these frequencies and study their effects on the mind. In one corner of the chamber, a peculiar device caught my eye. It resembled a gramophone, but with wires connecting it to a large pendulum. A switch hummed faintly when flipped, and a low, resonant tone filled the room. The sound was almost hypnotic, creating an eerie stillness that seemed to distort the passage of time. I felt as though minutes stretched into hours while listening. This chamber wasn't just a workspace. It was Eleanor's laboratory, a place where she tested her theories about time, sound, and their interplay. But where had she gone? And what was she trying to achieve? The discovery of Eleanor's chamber deepened the mystery but offered no clear answers. It wasn't until I interviewed Mr. Lark, the local handyman, that I found my next lead. He recalled seeing Eleanor on multiple occasions, walking toward the woods behind the clockmaker's shop in the dead of night. He also mentioned hearing faint chimes emanating from the forest, a sound so subtle that it seemed almost imaginary. Equipped with this information, I returned to the woods. The trail was barely discernible, overgrown with brambles and littered with fallen leaves. But as I moved deeper into the forest, I noticed brass tokens nailed to the trees. Each token was shaped like a clock hand, a silent marker left by Eleanor. They guided me along the path, their subtle gleam catching the light of my flashlight. The deeper I ventured, the more the forest transformed. The air grew heavier, and a strange stillness enveloped the area. It was as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. Finally, after hours of searching, I came upon a clearing. In the center stood a small, weathered cabin, its windows glowing faintly in the twilight. The cabin was humble, built of dark wood that blended into the surrounding trees. Ivy crept along its walls, and the faint hum of a generator could be heard from behind the building. As I approached, I caught sight of movement through the window. Eleanor, hunched over a workbench, intently focused on a project. When I knocked, she opened the door slowly, her face calm but wary. She seemed unsurprised to see me, as though she had been expecting someone to find her eventually. "I suppose you're here to ask why," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Inside, the cabin was a reflection of Eleanor's mind, organized chaos. Books and journals were stacked on every available surface. Gears, wires, and clock faces littered her workbench, where she had been assembling what appeared to be a highly intricate clock. Its design was unlike anything I'd seen before, with a series of concentric rings that seemed to spin independently. Eleanor began to explain. She had felt trapped by the monotony of life in Brindlewood, suffocated by its expectations and routines. The clockmaker's shop had offered her a window into something extraordinary, a chance to explore the mysteries of time and sound. "The chime at 3:15 is unique," she said, gesturing to an old recording device. "It resonates at a frequency that seems to stretch moments, creating a stillness that feels almost tangible. I needed to understand it, to immerse myself in that stillness." Her disappearance had been deliberate, a retreat to this secluded cabin where she could pursue her work without distraction. The cabin was her sanctuary, equipped with tools salvaged from the clockmaker's shop and powered by a generator she had installed herself. As I listened, it became clear that Eleanor wasn't running away. She was running toward something. Her experiments were an attempt to bridge the gap between the fleeting nature of time and the permanence of sound. She spoke with a passion that bordered on obsession, describing how certain frequencies seemed to reveal hidden layers of reality. Eleanor's decision to isolate herself wasn't driven by despair or malice, but by a profound need for solitude and purpose. She had grown tired of the life she had been living, of the constraints imposed by societal norms. Her retreat was an act of defiance and self-discovery, a chance to explore questions that had consumed her for years. I spent several hours with Eleanor, listening to her theories and observing her work. She showed me the clock she was building, explaining how its design incorporated principles of acoustics and resonance. She believed it could produce a chime capable of suspending time, if only for a moment. When I asked if she intended to return to Brindlewood, she shook her head. "This is where I belong," she said simply. "Here, I can hear the silence." After ensuring that Eleanor was safe and that her choice was her own, I returned to Brindlewood to share the news. The townsfolk were relieved to know she was alive, though many struggled to understand her decision. Over time, her absence became part of the town's lore, a story whispered by neighbors and retold to visitors. As for Eleanor, she remained in her cabin, occasionally venturing into town for supplies, but otherwise living in quiet isolation. Her work continued, and though her theories were never fully understood, they left an indelible mark on those who encountered her. Epilogue: A mystery beyond time. Eleanor Graham's story wasn't just about solving a disappearance. It was a journey into the human soul. Her quest for meaning, her rejection of convention, and her exploration of time's mysteries spoke to something universal. As I walked away from her cabin for the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed something extraordinary. Eleanor wasn't merely a missing person. She was a pioneer, charting a path through the stillness where clocks stop and silence begins. Her case was a reminder that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Some are meant to be experienced, to linger in the mind like the echo of a chime at 3:15. If you like this story and want to watch more stories by Detective Lefebre, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below. Remember, the truth is in details.